From the beginning, Oneil obsessed about the details of the Ramzi Youssef case. He dug into that plan to blow up the planes, known as the Bojinka plot. Investigators had found a connection with the World Trade Center bombing that led to Youssef's co-conspirator, Ahmad Ajaj, and a terrorist training manual with a title that would translate into Al-Qaeda, the base. They uncovered a list of phone numbers called by Youssef and other World Trade Center conspirators from their safe houses. One of those numbers belonged to Osama bin Laden, identified by an early CIA report as an Islamic extremist financier.
I think if you ask most terrorism experts in the mid-1990s, well, what about this man bin Laden? Most people in the mid-1990s would have said, ah, yes, the financier, the terrorist financier. And what Oneil said was, no, this man is not a financier. The money is money for a purpose. The purpose is building a worldwide terrorist network based out of Afghanistan, the point of which is going after the United States and after governments friendly to the United States, particularly in the Arab world.
Once convinced bin Laden was a threat to America, Oneil began a campaign within the FBI to sound the alarm.
The first time I ever heard the name Osama bin Laden was from John Oneil. And John Oneil was very much aware of who he was, who his group was, Al-Qaeda.
Over time, Robert Bear Bryant would become second in command at the FBI and a supporter of John Oneil.
He was a person that I had immense personal regard for. And we could argue like a couple of thieves in the night over issues, because we were both hard-headed, we were both a little bit Irish, and he much more so than I. And we had strong opinions about things, and we could get into it really quick.
Oneil argued for a plan that would represent a seismic shift in the way the FBI had always operated. He would give authority to a new, more analytic agent who would have enhanced technology to fight the new terrorism. That directly threatened the dominance of the group who held sway over the culture, the criminal division.
From his point of view, it was very clear what had to be done. You would basically have a whole branch of the FBI that would not be touched by the criminal side.
The criminal side, the J. Edgar Hoover G-men, who carried the guns and made cases and arrests. The man who would eventually lead the criminal division, Tom Picard, aggressively competed with Oneil for the attention of the director, Louis Freeh. As a former street agent himself, Freeh identified with the criminal division, and Tom Picard was a longtime friend. Oneil's counter-terror section was on the FBI's radar, but just barely.
A lot of people don't realize that a year prior to the first bombing of the World Trade Center, all but one squad was eliminated or reconsolidated in New York. So, and we were the flagship office that had most of the counterterrorism issues. We were pretty much scaling back, and while we would never close the program, it certainly was given much less resource support, and the thought and the threat was thought to have been diminishing.
To reinvigorate the counterterrorism effort, Oneil would try to muscle his way through the bureaucracy that surrounded Louis Freeh. But in that struggle, Oneil's personal style got in the way. They said he was too intense, pushed too hard, had what they called sharp elbows.
We often talked and joked about the fact that we weren't really in the club and we really didn't care. And that was something that John and I had shared on occasion. And there is a difference between those people who spend time in an organization and are happy to make it to the top and have never rolled over a stone or created a problem or solved a problem, you know, just to carefully run through and be there and be promoted. John was not like that.
Oneil just didn't do anything the FBI way, where at the end of a long shift, they went home to their families.
Yeah, he's the type guy who'll put his arm around you and take you out to dinner and smoke cigars and drink whiskey with at the end of the day and talk about all the issues in great depth. And he took his business beyond the work hours and well into the evenings where he liked to do that.
Oneil's evenings were spent at Washington's watering holes with a network of spies, CIA, DIA, NSC, and foreign intelligence officers.
John tended to be a little more flamboyant than a lot of the traditional agents in the FBI. I think there were jealousies. John did know everybody all over the world. John could pick up a phone and talk to somebody in an embassy, in a foreign intelligence service, anywhere in the world, and they all knew him.
And in the buttoned-down FBI, Oneil was considered too flashy.
It was the presentation, it was the, as he would call it was the package. They resented sort of the Burberry suit and the white pocket square and the expensive tie and the Bruno Magli shoes. You know, this wasn't the bureau.
I kind of thought he was kind of a dandy. You know, he's impeccably dressed, and looked like his fingernails were polished, and his hair swooped back, and a bunch of us kind of, you know, started calling him the Prince of Darkness.
He worked both ends of the candle pretty hard. We had a morning briefing every morning at 7:30. And sometimes he would come in late, and I told him I wanted him there. I don't care if he came in in his slippers and pajamas, be there. And he was.
Oneil's days were spent analyzing fragments of information. There was the story about two of Ramzi Youssef's Bojinka co-conspirators, Wali Khan Amin Shah and Abdul Hakim Murad. In 1995, Murad told a story of Middle Eastern pilots training at U.S. flight schools and of a proposal to dive bomb a jetliner into a federal building. It was a tantalizing bit of information. Agents were dispatched, but then withdrawn. The investigation languished.
I had a fairly low opinion of our headquarters throughout my whole career. It seemed like, you know, the headquarters was a very negative place where they would find a million reasons why you couldn't do something as opposed to why you could do something. It was not the type of place where you always felt you were getting a lot of assistance. John was the opposite of that. John, you could talk to and you could tell John what you needed, and John would get it.
James Kallstrom was the powerful boss of the FBI's New York office. Watching from a distance, he saw Oneil's attitude and expertise make enemies among the group that surrounded Louis Freeh.
Yeah, I'm sure there was some jealousy in the bureaucracy. There always is, and you can get by with some sharper elbows for a while, but you need to be right a lot. You know, the old saying, when you run with the wolves, don't trip, you know. You can have those types of character traits. You really need to have those to get the job done sometimes. But there'll always be a comeuppance in bureaucracies if you exercise that too much and you don't restrain it.
At headquarters, there were those in the upper reaches of the bureaucracy who looked for ways to wound Oneil. A whispering campaign began about Oneil's personal life. There was one version: married his high school sweetheart and had a couple of kids. Then there was the truth.
John had been separated from his family for some time, and I think John would have said to you, his family suffered as a result of that, as a result of his devotion to his job.
I think the FBI was his mistress. He loved it. He loved it more than he loved any woman in his life. He loved it.
And he loved Valerie James.
Very first time I saw John, I did something I had never done before and will never do again. I sent him a drink. He just had the most, he was standing at the bar and he had the most compelling eyes I had ever seen.
She had her own children, and after a while, they started calling him Dad. He hinted he might marry their mom. The trouble was, he hadn't told her he was already married.
I didn't know for 2 or 3 years. And someone that John worked with in the FBI's wife told me. And it was bad. I was shocked. You know, my family was shocked. I loved him. It had been 2 or 3 years by that point. What are you going to do, you know?
There weren't exactly FBI regulations against Oneil's behavior, but there were unwritten rules of the road, and the whisperers said Oneil's lifestyle made him unfit for his sensitive job.
John's brilliant. He's a guy that gets it. He is working on this incredible stuff day after day that he can talk to none of us about. He can talk to a very few, some people in law enforcement. He can't even tell all of his peers about what he's working on. It's that intense. Does a man like that come home and eat roast chicken and mashed potatoes every night? And I think his whole life needed to be complicated. I think he was complicated.